It's always a wonderful evening. You know, it's one of those great GSB events where we have students, we have alumni, we have a number of faculty here tonight, and of course we have our honoree. So it's it's a sort of gathering you love to be at. As a dean, it's one of the great pleasures of my job and my life to be at events where we bring the entire community together and we celebrate. Tonight, of course, we're celebrating and honoring the wonderful leadership and achievements of Hank, and we'll have more to say about that later, and you'll hear from him. But we're just so grateful for the kind of alumni we have from the business school. We're so proud of them and what they do and who they are and their impact on the world. And of course, Hank is a perfect exemplar of that, and that's one of our purposes this evening. Of course, another purpose is this is the Porras Award, and it gives us a chance every year, really, to celebrate one of our amazing faculty members, a real institution in his own right and an institutional treasure, really, at the GSB, Jerry Porras. He, of course, has played such a critical role in this organization, in this school, both for his efforts, but just himself as a role model, and of course has been recognized all over the country and all over the world in many, many dimensions. I saw just the other day that he was given a Lifetime Achievement Award by Hispanic Business Magazine, and in reading that, I realized that his first book that really took off, Built to Last, had sold over 1 million copies. And that's easy to sort of roll off the tongue, but 1 million copies, and you realize that 1 million people impacted by your work and your words is a pretty amazing teaching achievement. Talk about impact and reach. So that's the second thing we celebrate. We're just going to celebrate Hank. We're going to honor him. We celebrate Jerry in terms of the award in his name. And it's always so great to have him here every year, and Charlene. But we also celebrate just the event here and the diversity at the school. I just think the role that diversity plays at our school is so critical today. We're trying to be better at helping people prepare for the 21st century. For a world that's small and interconnected, it's global in every respect, which right away means a multitude of races and ethnicities and regions and religions and geographies. And so for us to put together the sort of class we do is a wonderful, wonderful opportunity for our students. Never again will they get a chance to be together with so many outstanding people from so many different places and with all kinds of different backgrounds. It is, of course, your own development where we directly impact you, but the way you help impact the development of others is an equally important dimension of the GSB experience. And I think the emphasis we place now on global, on leadership, and on diversity, those three things really come together. It's just going to be impossible to be a leader in the 21st century without having that kind of global mindset, having that sense of responsibility that leadership is all about, and having a comfort and an ability to work with all kinds of people from different backgrounds, arenas, areas, religions, and races. So I think that's what we also celebrate. We really celebrate who we are as a community in an evening like this. Now, this is the only time you're going to hear from me. Later, after dinner, Jerry, the namesake for the award, is going to say a few words and introduce Hank, the honoree of the award. You've heard me say a bit about Jerry. I just want to again acknowledge and recognize his amazing accomplishments at our school. He's been here since 1972, so he's been here 36 years. Grew up in West Texas, went to Texas Western University in El Paso. There's a fan out there. That was Victor, I think. Yeah. and he's got his PhD at UCLA, and to our everlasting pleasure and benefit, he became a member of the GSB faculty in 1972. So if there's one thing I want to leave you with about Jerry is we'd love to have more Jerrys. So out there in this room, if some of you are thinking about, gee, I came to the GSB, but maybe I ought to be a faculty member. Or friends that you have, or people that you have, and think, gee, you ought to think about going to school, getting a PhD, and pursuing an academic career. The impact you can have on young people, on the world of ideas, on the world, and on, as Jerry says in his latest book, Success Built to Last, creating a life that matters. And he's truly somebody who's lived up to the words of his book, created a life that matters. So I just want to again salute Jerry, say how grateful we are that we have a chance to recognize Hank. Welcome you tonight. Enjoy the evening, enjoy the dinner, and I'm looking forward to the presentation and the speeches after dinner. Thank you very much.
I'd like to introduce our honoree today. His background is described in the little programs that are at your table, and I urge you to look at it and read it, because I could read it to you, but I'm sure it wouldn't stick. And that way you can get a better sense of really some of the things that he's accomplished. But currently, he's Senior Vice President of Strategy and Partnership at Microsoft. Now, many of you might ask, what does that role mean? And I didn't ask that question directly of Hank, but indirectly I tried to get at, well, what the heck does that mean? And he couldn't tell me. And it's not because he didn't want to tell me. It's that he's got this very mysterious role at Microsoft. He sometimes calls himself a shadow vice president, which means that he's kind of like a shadow, not in the shadows, but he's kind of like a shadow. And from what I can gather, he spends an enormous amount of time making things happen through the influence and persuasion of his own ideas and his own abilities. And he doesn't spend time trying to make things happen because he's in a real power position. My sense is that that's going to be a very, very important style of leadership in the future. It is important today, but I think it's going to grow in importance in the future. As organizations become flatter, spread out more, you can't exercise the traditional sort of hierarchical power over other people. You have to convince them and influence them to do the things that not only will make the organization successful, but would also benefit them. And I think Hank has developed a very successful ability to do that, and it's reflected in the fact that he's playing this very, very important role at Microsoft. Now, if you don't like some of the things Microsoft has been doing, I think he's the guy to blame. I've enjoyed getting to know him. I didn't know him when he was a student. He avoided touchy-feely, so that should tell you something. But I have enjoyed getting to know him since he was selected for this award. I've spent a reasonable amount of time with him, and I think you'll find he's a very insightful, very thoughtful, very smart guy that has a lot of important things to say. So before he makes his remarks, I'd like to have him come up here so that I can officially present him the award, and then he'll be responsible for the rest of the time. Hank, congratulations. There is something tangible to show that he was actually here for a very specific reason. And this is the 13th annual Jerry I. Porras Latino Leadership Award to Hank Vigil, MBA class of 1987. So please welcome Hank Vigil.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good luck.
I'm incredibly humbled to be here tonight with you, and for a number of reasons. In particular, I'm a huge fan of Stanford. I've gotten to interact with a number of students in the last several years. I serve today on the management board of the business school, and we push Dean Joss and Dan to let us talk to students and hear from you. And every time you do speak to us, I come away incredibly impressed and humbled by the caliber, the energy, the optimism of the students here. And in that regard, my goal tonight is really mostly to aim my comments at you. Before I do that, I do want to add a couple of thank yous. I want to thank my parents. Much like Stanford and Microsoft, my parents were both quite supportive and loving, but they did demand excellence, and without kind of the demand of excellence that they imbued in me when I was young, I don't think I would be here tonight. So to them, I have to give them a horn. And I have to acknowledge my wife. Unlike Sean Penn when he got his Academy Award and forgot to thank his wife, don't want to make that mistake. She's a partner who's for a model of life for me that's to be lived as an adventure. Catherine is principally about laughter, and even more than my boss, Mr. Steve Ballmer, she's always pushing me to do new things. I am a child of Stanford. I was an undergraduate here. I had a philosophy. I read it and took a philosophy degree, which meant when I arrived at the business school, I was very much in the poet category. We didn't call those of you who are analytically trained turbos then. Sounds like a power turtle to me. I don't know, but the fact that I was a product of Stanford, I'm proud to be here and represent it. I try to sell students to come here. The new curriculum, I think, is an amazing thing, which I've heard some of you talk about. And so I want to thank Stanford. I'm sure that Stanford will, certainly in the form of the development office, occasionally gently, remind me that I can thank them back in certain ways, and I'm happy to do so. My goals here are to challenge you a little bit, to perhaps have a couple of ideas and thoughts that cause you to reflect a little bit. And if I'm lucky, I'll actually inspire one or two of you. That would be certainly my goal. Jerry raised the question, what do I do? What does Hank do? It's actually a question that gets asked quite often. My day job is basically to manage a fairly broad portfolio of strategic engagements that cross the global media business, global telecom, the evolving consumer electronics industry, and that very protean world of hardware and software companies that make up Web 2.0 and Web 1.0 and Web of the Future. And from that platform, I've had an amazing ability to kind of see a number of business problems that make every day a learning experience. And it's clear that these industries are all colliding. And in some senses, that collision of these industries is causing a great deal of change, a great deal of transformation, and a great deal of opportunity. So my job is in some senses to help Microsoft manage its portfolio of interest against those partnerships, and which includes, frankly, having the ability to figure out inside of Microsoft, which has many interests, many divisions, what is our collective interest, and how do we manage it so that we don't suboptimize. And so my job. And there's actually a few people in the room, Beatrice here, James, Tom, people who were either came to Microsoft because of an acquisition or worked was one of our corporate development. She's part of Hanco, don't forget. That, how you sort of knit together a fabric of people who can get things done in the informal part of the organization where I work, and I actually agree with you, Jerry, that is an amazingly powerful lever. The truth is that and I have no staff. Nobody really works for me. That's sort of by design. The experience I've had over time with people at a corporate staff level who are there with a job, and you try to get somebody from a business division, you get conflict, and so in a way, even though at times it stretches, figuring out a way to get the people who actually own the accountability, own the resources in those divisions, pull them together, and go solve a problem that crosses an organizational boundary. That's kind of what I try to do. So it's a very interesting thing. And I celebrated my 21st year. Amazingly, I guess it was last October. And I was probably one of the few people who was still at the same company that I left. In fact, I did my summer internship at Microsoft between first and second year. So that either speaks to my truly lack of imagination, or the fact that the challenges and problems I've gotten to address continue to change, and I think hopefully it's the latter. We are here to not only honor me, which is dubious. My brother was the one family member that called into question the intelligence of Stanford, but then he's a Calwini, so what do you expect? Dirty golden bear. But really we're here to honor Jerry as an example of not only leadership, but really continued exploration of a topic. And Jerry has looked at companies that are successful and asked the question, how do they sustain themselves? And one of the things I tried to use to organize my thoughts tonight was, Jerry's proverb about companies who are great and who are sustained is that they've somehow managed to preserve the core and innovate. And he warned me at lunch today that if I use the examples wrong, he'll get up and actually correct me. So I feel like I'm going to be tested. But clearly that question is a deep one. What is it about the core? What is the core? How do you preserve? What should you preserve? I think that operates really at the level of each of you as individuals, as well as the firms you'll work at, the companies you'll start, and even your lifelong endeavors. How do you determine the core, and how from that core do you innovate? At the personal level, for me, I actually think the Greeks had it right. I think you need to lead and examine life. It's a principle that, while somewhat old-fashioned, I do think it remains utterly modern and relevant, because getting centered in who you are, what you stand for, the values you exhibit in your behaviors, because words matter, but behaviors matter more, ultimately. And it's really that core that is the foundation of your leadership voice over time. And so, figuring out what the core is for you as a person, I would argue a critical enterprise. And it's interesting because how you determine that core of what you stand for is not like some things we can do today. You really shouldn't outsource that to somebody else. And we can outsource many things, but at the end of the day, you can't really outsource that. And if you do, my guess is you'll end up being, less happy, less fulfilled, and less ultimately successful. So in addition to the notion of examination, I would urge you to take a very active role in how you think about the formation of your core, which means, for me at least, it's meant that I've very actively thought about how I self-fashion. And as an ongoing heuristic, lifelong student, ultimately it really means how you think about what you let in. A cornerstone of your core is emotional, and I think our culture often is less comfortable with really, figuring out how people can explore, what is about their emotional cores that matter. And the reason I actually think that's so important is, one, when you work in a human context, unlike the models we run and the analysis we do, I say organizations are wet. They're not dry, they're wet. And at the end of the day, your emotional core, if you listen to it, is going to be an extremely good market pricing mechanism to tell you whether or not, you're moving in the right place. And that's hard because discomfort, as I'll argue in a minute, does not mean you're moving in the wrong place. It may actually mean you're moving in the right place, and being in an uncomfortable spot, is the precondition for changes that transform. Choosing your teachers is also an important part of it. So many of those teachers, some of them are here. Professor Van Horn, George. I wouldn't be here except he should have flunked me in my third quarter finance class because I really didn't do very well. But your teachers, I argue, my best teachers have been what I would call failure, and I would actually claim that discomfort is a close second good teacher. And I'll come a bit to how to think about that in some of the anecdotes, the parables from Microsoft that I talk about in a minute. if you step back a minute, I actually want to talk a bit about getting this award in the Obama, what I call the Obama moment, because irrespective of your politics, pro or not pro, the thing about Obama that resonated for me was that he ran his campaign, and that campaign was, in some senses, a paragon of managerial discipline and excellence. What a well-managed effort. So as managers, at a minimum, you've got to basically stand up and salute that effort. Secondarily, what resonated for me is that, Barack Obama did not, in no way walked away from the fact that he was a black African American man. He certainly did not run his campaign, with that as something that was front and center. He was someone who ran his campaign on the notion of competence, on merit, and basically, at the end of the day, a vision of how, despite our differences, you could find principles of alignment. And at the end of the day, the hard problems that we have to try to solve together as a nation can only be solved if we find approaches around joint problem solving. And those two things, principles alignment and in a negotiation, how can you approach it as long as possible as a joint problem solving exercise before you get to the moment of the zero-sum trade-off? Those to me are a couple of principles that I try to live by every day, and I found them actually to be quite effective. And so Barack Obama as our president, we'll see how he does. He's a man who's certainly comfortable in his own skin, at ease, elegant, and beckoning each of us to our better selves. And I think that's important. And in some sense, I'm proud to be accepting this award in a year when the majority of the American electorate, got past old and in some sense inhibiting ideas about who a person can be, and signaled the inspirational notion that at the end of the day, it's merit that matters, it's competence that matters, and I urge you to take up that banner. The notion of Jerry's, preserve the core and innovate from that. I talked a bit about the core. I actually have very little concern about your generation of students being, gifted at the raw materials of innovation. You won't think it's in any way remarkable, but you swim in a sea of communication. You are gifted at self-expression. You have a psychology of optimism. You have an ability to really what I think of as the hip hop generation. You sample across cultures, styles, boundary conditions all the time. And that's a great gift. That's a great thing. It's the raw materials of innovation. What I would say about that, though, and tiny bit of a potential challenge to you is, and it's been my experience, although less so I think with students of the GSB, is that rigor as an old-fashioned word remains important. And there actually are differences that matter, and so that one's facility with managing across boundary conditions and being able to sample many things doesn't mean that at the end of the day, values don't discriminate. They actually do discriminate. And the question for you will be, given your ease and comfort in managing across this giant sea of opportunity, what do you focus on, and what to discard? There was an old rule that we had in the Excel engineering team, ancient history now, but shipping is a feature. At a certain point, calling it close and deciding this is what you were going to do, shipping was a feature. That became the mantra, which in some parts of the company we've lost for a variety of reasons and need to get back. So the other thing I'd say is that not all, and maybe not most innovations matter. Most innovations actually end up being just random. And so the question is, of the innovations that are out there, which are the ones of value, and how do you get there? We live in an age of disruption. It's now a commonplace that all the stable hierarchies are shifting. I was remarking to a few of you that last week the U.S. equities were on the tipping point of being negative. It's like an imponderable. GE trading for $75 billion when it had cash and securities of about $90 billion, in addition to all of their industrial businesses, and yet their toxic bank basically was, called into question whether they had negative equity. I mean, to me, it's truly an imponderable on some level. But despite this age of disruption, my very firm belief is that the new hierarchies will form, new patterns, new themes are going to emerge, and with them all those vast opportunities for wealth creation. At the end of the day, it's going to be your facility with that sea of opportunity and the application of rigor and critical thinking that are going to help you discern what matters. And to the extent you do that well, you're going to be very successful. I'd also, give you a slightly, normative thing, which is be patient. I do think that we all get trained with the ease of how things come to us now online. We can get a search result. We can get a wiki result. How many of you right now are tweeting? At least one. I knew it would be you, by the way. Two. Good for you. But in some senses, my belief is that the crucible of experiences really end up forming your judgment skills. And the hard lesson, the truth is, you really can't take a shortcut to those experiences. And so actually, seek out and lead a life that gathers diverse experiences. I think it's quite important. So now that you have your core and as a foundation, and again, with you, when I look out at you, I'm humbled. I'm confident you guys all have a healthy self-regard. And again, that's super important. Even when it gets rocked, come back to it. What I'd argue for now is that it's quite important as you think about your judgment skills to learn how to set aside yourself. And it doesn't really disappear, but in the act of setting aside your sort of center on the side, you develop, even more objectivity, even more, ability to really listen and hear and learn from the other side. My observation in 20 years of management is that the people who are making the best decision really are the ones who don't have ego disease. They can set aside, their perspective and then appropriately engage it when it's time. And they actually have the judgment to know when it's time. And in some sense, that's the fascinating art of management and ultimately, in my view, leadership. So I actually do believe in the Google mantra of fail fast, fail often. It's really the feedback loop, the data that's the asset. And then, again, your criteria of what you decide to let in will determine, exactly how you learn. Microsoft, we actually have the same heuristic. The problem is when you have giant legacies, the speed of which you can fail is actually much slower. And I actually would say to you that may be abstractly true of many legacies. So you got to play with that notion a little bit. To the extent you take my advice and you accrue rich experiences, my belief is you're going to you're going to accumulate a set of lenses you can bring to many problems. And your portfolio of lenses you bring is going to give you those diversity of lenses are going to give you adaptability. And adaptability in the biological sense is fitness. Your ability to change to external conditions based on your adaptability. So as you build yourself, as you build your organizations, your teams, think about that diversity of lenses and seek to make it as broad as possible. I would say that the paradox of managing the gray. One of the students, I don't know if it was you, Mike, but somebody said that the critical analysis seminar, was interesting for the turbos because they had to wrestle with all this gray. And so I predict that for most of you in your management and leadership careers, managing the gray is going to be basically your daily exercise. And so having tolerance for ambiguity and letting things unfold is one end of the paradox. And I've argued for you having that tolerance. On the other hand, if you listen to your judgment skills over time, it'll become clear you need to make a decision. You need to take an action. You can't kick the can down the road. The organizational disease I've seen is usually a function of managers who kick the can down the road and don't have the courage to make the hard decision. And so while it's important for you to maintain a tolerance none of that relieves you of the responsibility of having a point of view. And in fact, and I'm sure it's true of you, so this is sort of preaching to the choir, having a point of view against which others bounce off of, and you'll get a chance later when I open to a little bit of Q&A, that dynamic of bouncing off your points of view is what really generates the synthetic learning, I would argue, again. So lessons from Stanford, parables from Microsoft. I mean, the one thing I took away from Stanford was that, and much like Stanford, Microsoft, data matters. I mean, analysis matters. We model, but at the end of the day, the model's output isn't the answer. You actually have to interpret the model back to reality. When we were designing Excel 3, again, ancient history. Rich Tong, a classmate, and I were the product managers. We had this massive amount of output from our research, and there were lots of theories about what it meant. But then it dawned on Rich and I one evening about midnight that 70% of what people do with a spreadsheet is they sum numbers. I mean, like all the stuff that Lotus and Microsoft, optimization algorithms. What people do with a spreadsheet is they sum numbers, and so basically we realized that if you could just make summing a number a one-button thing, that was it, and which led to a toolbar concept, which led to a new graphical way of thinking about a spreadsheet, which in my view was a breakthrough moment in how we displaced Lotus, as the thought leader in the marketplace. And so how you interpret back that sea of data to a conclusion matters. I mentioned at the beginning failure as a teacher. I mean, there's a couple of failure parables that matter to me, and try to be brief about them. One is with News Corp. I could say this about several partners, but we spent lots of time trying to build business together that was often difficult, complex, painful, and it often didn't work. And yet we stayed engaged with partners. One of my principles of partnership is that it's really about continuity and trust. I mean, organizations tend not to trust each other, but I'm here to tell you people can trust each other. And so the News Corp relation with Microsoft, really, even when we actually managed to agree together to buy DirecTV, we had Microsoft lending money to News Corp. John Malone was going to put in equivalent money. I'm very proud of the fact that John Malone stepped into our terms without changing them. John Malone told me on my 40th birthday, which I spent in his office, that if I didn't agree to this set of terms, I'd be here when I was 50. Which is almost true. Some things never change. But the net of all those failed efforts that didn't conclude in a business sense with News Corp, ended up creating a set of relationships that were trust-based, that when it came time for them to ask us, hey, can we distribute Fox Sports on MSN, and we took them from 60,000 uniques to 60,000 to 600,000 and made them a peer of ESPN in literally 2 weeks. It spoke to the power of how at a certain point, if you stay engaged, you will find a success. The other failure parable is a work in process. And this is a case where the failure was less about analysis. It was really, in this case, a failure of my and our ability to influence the outcome in the right way. We in our group of us, we said we got to go buy Overture. At the time, Overture was the one way in which the leading company that actually managed search monetization. Google was behind, but was on it with with AdSense. And we actually got the numbers right. We basically, it's going to cost about $1.8 billion to buy this thing. Not that much. There's not that many engineers, which was coming back to the notion of what's core and how do you innovate. And we just didn't have the ability to convince Bill and Steve and others that the asset wasn't the software. The asset was the scale network of advertisers and publishers in the marketplace already working in a system, and that with the lens of we do software, in some senses, our core should have been figuring out, how you monetize software, including the new ways. We still thought of ourselves, I'm sure they wouldn't say it this way, but we were in the disk duplication and license business. And in the failure to kind of convince them, we in some senses didn't see what Google saw, which was, basically if it's part of your lifeblood, you vertically integrate back into it and make it part of your core. And we have been playing catch up on that, and I'm actually long-term confident we'll get there. But it's an example to me when you actually fail on execution and fail on influence, it can have long-term negative impact, and that's certainly the case here. So those are a few failure parables. I guess the question I'd ask you is, where are you going? I urge you to make yourselves the case. You use your new business school skills to think about what your finish line might look like a few years out. I sat down when I was 40 after I left John Malone's office and actually wrote a memo about where I wanted to be at 50. And it wasn't like a fully, every sentence was a sentence, but I had a framework that said, what did the finish line look like? And that was actually from a mentor from Coca-Cola, Sergio Zeman, crazy man, who had failed himself. This was the guy who had basically taken Coke and said, New Coke. New Coke's better. Everybody will love New Coke. That was a failure. He actually came back with Coke Classic, which was kind of a success on top of a failure. But Sergio taught me that think about the finish line is an important thing to do. What I'd say about that is 10 years is too long, especially in this day and age. I got to 50 a year ago, and I looked at the memo, and I actually felt pretty good about it. But I realized writing a 10-year plan was too long. I had dinner with a good friend of mine, who used to be the number 2 at Nokia in London a few weeks ago. This was a man who, literally could step up into the CEO job of Nokia, and he actually chose not to because his plan was time for new experiences. And it was amazing as we sat there in London and had dinner that our analysis of what it was and how it mattered comes back to that theme of the examine life, figuring out what your core is and how you define success internally. And how you define success internally, for me, was also another failure event. In 95, when we shipped Office, I was at the height of the game. I had the largest marketing budget, the most product managers. I'd written the brand memo. We had moved from 6% share over 5 years to about 90% share, which had nothing to do with a Windows monopoly, by the way, and all those depositions I had to do on the overpricing litigations years later. We had a better product. That's what we won. And but the example that Pekka said to me was like, do you have the ability to know what matters to you, and you can walk away from all those trappings that externally define typically what success means? And for me, he was an inspiration. He also had a very interesting concept. He said, I hope I live till I'm 92. That's about so much time. Therefore, I have to think about a year not as 360 days, but 120 days. That means that every month is 10 days, and I want to be able to figure out how I'm going to create new memories in every 10-day period. So, food for thought. I thought it was a very powerful concept, and an imaginative concept. So, I think you should use your imagination as you think about what you're going to do next. My bias, and this is a bit of a normative statement, I'd push you to focus on value creation versus value arbitrage. I know many of you are ex-bankers. Many of you plan to go back into the financial services industries of various kinds. Those are honest things. These answers may be, hey, I want to be a private equity partner in 5 years. What that really means is, hey, I want 2.5% on some limited partner's money, and 30% of the back end. And it's a great thing. Getting wealthy is a great aspiration. Just don't make it your only aspiration would be my thing. And back to the message about experience, at the end of the day, the best investors are the ones that actually have judgment based on actually having lived in organizations or knowing them and knowing at the end of the day how to really look not just at the numbers but at managers and choose the right ones. Tiny bit of a normative statement, but you can push back in the Q&A if we have it. So at the end of the day, my model of leadership, that I've kind of come to at this stage, but I tried to summarize it for you, is I actually do believe in finding the best athletes. At the end of the day, there are best athletes. Find them. Make yourself one. But then, adopt a model of service and sponsorship. I think why Hankco, the affectionate label of my virtual company inside of Microsoft, which at this point has many members not only inside of Microsoft, but many members who have left, who all stay in touch. Beatrice is a member. is because when you basically invest your time in ensuring that people are listened to, that they're mentored, that their work gets exposed, that you figure out how to advance them, that creates momentum and morale. And the source of this quote may be questionable, but I do agree with Ralph Nader that leaders create other leaders and not followers. And the way to do that, in my view, is to take this model of sponsorship, and get people into a mode of leadership that's all their own. And if you're still there and you can apply vision, which and you can fuse your passion with your projects, that creates great motivation and morale. And I can tell you, as Colin Powell said, that morale is a force multiplier. It's a big hinge that can drive transformational change in the things you do, the organizations you work with, and so I would be disciples of the concept of, leaders of leaders, morale, great ability to drive transformation. So that's kind of the last thoughts. I do think that as a personal style, old-fashioned words matter. I do think that once you found your core, you can have your feet on the ground, as Chi Lu, the new president of our online businesses, says. But have your feet on the ground, have your head above the clouds, which means strategic clarity, and operational crispness. Have honor and have humility, and at the end of the day, those values will come back in spades to you when you discover, as I did, as a sort of shocking, surprising moment, that without ever expecting to be one, I was viewed as a leader. And in that spirit, I charge you all to go forward and try to find your leadership voices. We all stand on the shoulders of others. I certainly stand on the shoulders of my professors, who I see here affectionately tonight. So think about how your shoulders are going to act as, in some senses, the footpaths of those that come after you. Find a way to give back. I gave a scholarship to the university a few years ago, and I sat down with a young woman Friday, Lucy Martinez, a young woman from Wasco who's a human biology major, and just the most amazingly bright, charming person. And if you can change one person's life, do it. Define your community, give back. I'm not going to be normative about how to define your community. Define it broadly. The magnitude of the challenges ahead are going to define your generation, and yet I can't leave tonight without saying I'm incredibly optimistic about your abilities to meet the challenges that come ahead, which are going to be significant. This is a troubling time, but like the nomads of old who carried their yurts on their horseback as they rode into uncharted territory, they were singing on the way to battle. So as you move forward, I urge you to sing on the way to battle.